Hi, welcome back. So in the last video, we finished a really good code along to get a good practice with the grid system. And in this one, we are going to start with something known as the Flexbox, right? So what is a Flexbox actually, right? And first of all, this is something that you could work without. Like I have worked without it in a couple of projects, but it is actually really powerful, right? And it is a concept for the general CSS. And I could have taught it before teaching Bootstrap too. That is not a problem. But the reason I'm teaching it after Bootstrap is that Bootstrap 4, which was a major upgrade from 3, gives really good utilities to actually implement Flexbox. So what the Flexbox utilities in general are, and again, this is not just limited to Bootstrap. This is a general CSS thing. Is it gives you a really good power of moving things around on your page, like horizontally, vertically, as you know, easily, very easily, and it's really powerful in that sense, right? So let me just show you what this is all about. If you go to the Bootstrap docs, again, this is a CSS thing, but we are going to implement it using Bootstrap because the tools they provide us are really useful and easy to implement. Although the same thing would be done with CSS too. So now in the documentation, I'm going to go to utilities, and here I'm going to go to Flex. So now this is what Flexbox is. And again, there's a lot of content. And like always, I'm going to show you the basic part and the need and all of this. And whenever you need something new, you can just visit this page and you'll get what this is all about, right? Okay, so the first thing is that this deflex. We'll get to that in this video. You can ignore that for now. We'll see what this is in just a moment. So what I want to show you is this, right? So we see two things here. Imagine these were buttons, right? And so we have 3 buttons on the left, and here we have 3 buttons on the right. So, and if I show you, these are all the things you could do by a flex. And the best thing is that you do not have to make any CSS for this. You can just simply add these classes. Deflex is common in all of those, and again, we'll get to that in just a moment. And everything else is justify content, start and center, between, around. So, these are just really powerful tools to place your things on the page and move things around whenever you need them to move. And it also offers you the breakpoints thing. If you see right here, small, medium, large, and this is extra small by default, and then extra large. And so the spacing can change and everything can change by simple Bootstrap classes, right? So let's just jump into how this is used and you will get an even better idea. So now if I save this by the name of flex.html, and I'll get my Bootstrap boilerplate. So the first thing is going to this getting started, and I'll get this starter template. I'll paste this, right? So yeah, and then I can go back to utilities, flex. So now I can keep this h1, it doesn't matter. I'll keep the title as Flexbox, and let me just change this to Flexbox 10. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make 2 buttons. This is first. I'll make 3 buttons. Second, third, and just to use Bootstrap and make them look good, I can add a class to all of them. This one can be btn primary, and just in case you do not remember, class is equal to btn gives Bootstrap an indication that this is a button, and BT and dash. The next thing basically decides the color of the button and the background color and all, right? So I can do warning, and here I'll do now. I have some autocomplete due to an extension that I've installed. You might get just simple class is equal to empty quotes and you can fill that in. This is not something with direct VS Code, so don't get worried about that. So here I can add success. And now, if I open this up, I see I have something like this, right? And what I'm going to do is, to show you better, I'm going to wrap this inside of a container. And not, even though this is not good practice, I'll give it a style of background color of this and a border of and now if I refresh, I see this is what I have. And if I make this a little darker, let me see. Alright, if I save and I refresh, I see this is my container. And one more thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to give this a good height of let's say 300 pixels. And then if I refresh, I see this is now my container and these are my 3 buttons. So the way we are going to learn Flex is we are going to move these 3 around in this container, and that will give you a really good idea of how the Flexbox utilities are used. Alright, so here is our container, and the first thing to use Flexbox is that you need to give this a class of dflex. So now what does this dflex do? I'll refresh this and ignore this stretch thing right here. We'll get to that in this video only. But if I inspect this container right now, we see that this has a display of flex, right? And if I did not have this class, you'll have to believe me in that, otherwise we'll have to refresh this twice. This would not have a display of flex. Dflex basically stands for display flex, right? And what does display flex mean? So display is basically a CSS property, and this is not obviously a good place to write it, but just to show you, you could have something like display block in a lot of places, or you could have something like display inline. So you might have got the idea about what it is by block and inline, but it basically gives kind of a structure. Like display block would mean that you are essentially placing BR tags before and after the thing, even if they were not there, and you're making it a block level. And inline means that you're making it an inline element. That means no BR tags before and after. So that is what display actually is, and there's a property of display flex, and you have to use this property of display flex whenever you're trying to work with Flexbox utilities, right? And that is what this dflex does, and that is why in the documentation they had the dflex in everything. They were using this in the inline flex. You could also use inline flex. There are combination of things in this display too. You could have like inline flex or block flex, a lot of things like that. So you can see what the difference is. Flex is block by default, so it will take up the whole line, and inline flex will take just the amount of line it needs, and that's what will happen. So this is, again, you have the breakpoints here too, and you can see they have the dflex in all the things they are using. So that was the dflex, and now what we have to do is we have to give a class to this div to move these things around. So everything in the Flexbox model works around two axes, right? The horizontal axis and the vertical axis. Now this horizontal axis is just known as the axis, and this vertical axis is known as the cross axis, right? And the direction by default, you'll see why we need the direction in just a moment, is that the horizontal axis is from left to right, and the vertical axis, which is the cross axis, is from up to down. So this is the only thing you have to remember, right? The next thing is, so now let's see the first thing we have. This is known as justify content. And the next you would have something here. So first let's see what this is from the docs. Where is it? Yep. So we have these things here. So justify content start. So the first thing here corresponds to the first line here. Second thing here corresponds to the second line here, and so on, right? So this is what justify content does. So you have justify content in all of these, and this is start, so all three are at the start, end, all three are at the end, center, all three are at the center, between, they are like evenly spaced, and around, the space is distributed equally among all of them. So we'll just do this once in our own code, and that is actually all it is, right? So so you can see by default this is justify content start, right? Because they are already at the start of this. Refresh. I see nothing changes because they are at the start. What if I do end? I see they move to the end. And that is something really powerful. Now imagine having to move something around, and you can move it with just changing this one word, right? And that is really, really helpful. What if I do center? I see they come to the center. And if I do, let's say, around, I see there's an even space between all of them. This is actually half of this. So this plus this corresponds to this. And now the one thing that I wanted to show you is that this justify content is again not a very specific Bootstrap class. This is something for CSS. You can see they have a justify content CSS thing. The only thing that this class is doing is that this is making the justify content to be what we need it to be, right? And if I make this end again, and if I refresh, I see this becomes flex end. So only thing that is changing is this justify content property of CSS, and we could go manually to our style sheet and do that, and that would give us the same effect. But of course, adding classes from Bootstrap is easier and shorter. So that's what we are doing. The last one that I haven't showed you is between. So now this is what we get. And now this is not just for 3 elements, they had 3 elements there too, so it might be confusing. If I get one more down here, even then the effect will be same, right? If I do around, the effect is still the same. So you could have as many elements in here as you want, and this justify content thing would work perfectly fine, right? So this is all you need to know to arrange your elements horizontally as you want. Now, I'm not going to show the breakpoints in great detail, but you could have something like this. Let's say this. So when the screen size is medium and above, it will be around, and all the other time it will be start because start is default. Or you could do justify content, let's say end. Let's see if that works, right? So as soon as we get to small, we get justify content end, and here we have around. So you can see this is actually really helpful in making your page responsive too. And you could want this a lot of times, right? So now we've seen everything related to horizontal, and this also gives us, if you remember, the cross axis, that is the vertical axis. And everything remains the same, except instead of this justify content, we have the thing known as align items, right? And so we'd have to do kind of the same thing: start, end, center, baseline, and stretch, right? So let's just try all of that. And you could add that as a separate class. So I'll do align items. So, and you can see that by default, this which is stretch. So for the justify content, the default is start, and for the align items, the default is stretch. So we can do this start, and if I refresh, I see my buttons are now at the start. And if I do something like end, my buttons are at the end. If I do between, there's nothing else between, there's center, sorry, this gets to this. So you see what the align items thing does, right? And these two classes, and actually there are three classes, and by just changing these three classes, you could move your elements around inside the box. Again, this is the box model. So inside the box, you could move your things around as much as you want by just adding a couple of classes. And that's why this is really powerful. But again, you could do this without any problems too, using normal CSS. So that is why you could or you could not use Flex at some times, but it is really powerful and you will find its use at some point of time, right? So that is what Flex was. And one of the reasons that it is so important, that if you go to layout and then grid, and then if you do a search for Flex, I see I get 16 results for that, right? And that is because Flexbox is actually a big part of the grid system, because everything is grid is in the Flexbox by default. This is the Flex model, right? Grid is also a Flex model, and you might not need to know that at a lot of points, but it can be helpful at some point of time too, right? So yeah, there's a lot of things in this. And yeah, so that's the basic of what the Flexbox is. Now you also have a lot of other things, like you could reverse the axis from, currently the axis is left to right. You could make it right to left by adding a class, or currently the cross axis is top to bottom. You could make it bottom up. And that is actually, I don't think that's quite useful to cover right now. So I'm not going to cover this at this point of time. If you ever need that, again, we have this. You can go to utilities, you can select Flex, then you can do whatever you want. They have everything here already, right? And yeah, this is quite useful. So that is all that I wanted to show you for the Flexbox right now, and we'll see if we have some other use for this later on, and if we do, we'll get back to this. And that's all. So that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.